So I think in academia, there's always ongoing conversations. Conversations are never static. So although some things that are in all of our statements of faith are not going to change, they're the ground that we work from, there's a lot to discuss on top of those sort of core commitments. So yes, there is a desire to put out new ideas, and that can be like implicit in the question. I thought it's a little bit of risk, like you could be just being controversial for controversy's sake or something. So sure, there could be a temptation toward that because controversy sells books. So we want to be responsible. You don't want to just chase readers in that way. At the same time, there are a lot of legitimate conversations always going on in academia in every discipline. And that's still a wonderful contribution. There's nothing wrong with adding to a conversation.
Taking the ball a little further, that's all.
Yeah, you're probably not going to be the final word. None of us are. Maybe there's a new Augustine in our era, but maybe not. And even so, people still build on Augustine. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Welcome to Pastor Scholar, Bridging the Gap, examining issues from both an academic and pastoral perspective. I'm Chris Miller, your moderator. Joining me, as always, is founding pastor of Revolve Bible Church, Ryan Day, and Dr. Cory Marsh, author, editor, and professor of New Testament at Southern California Seminary. Joining us this episode is Dr. Madison Trammel, publisher at B&H Academic, a division of Lifeway Christian Resources. He holds an MA in Christian History and Theology from Wheaton College, as well as a THM and PhD in Historical Theology from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. An author himself, he wrote, and I'll hold up the book for our people, Fundamentalism in the Public Square, Evolution, Alcohol, and Culture Wars After the Scopes Trial. Here with us to discuss Christian publishing and writing, we are pleased to have Dr. Trammel on the podcast. Welcome. And before we get to discussing the process of writing and we get to your book, first tell us, as a publisher at B&H Academic, what is your role? What is it you do?
Yeah, thank you for having me. First of all, it's an honor to be here.
Of course.
Good to meet you all.
How often have we tried to get Madison on this podcast?
This is true.
And for one reason after another, it just hasn't worked. This has been in the works for what?
Well,
like
I think
a year or
how
so
often
at least?
have you tried?
Right, yeah.
I started to wonder if
That's good.
Dr.
That's a good
Trammel
point.
liked you.
That's a good
That
point.
was-
Yeah,
It was
right.
my fault, so I apologize. I had all these excuses. I apologize. I'm glad to be here now.
You're here now.
We're so
We're
happy to
out.
have you. So what is it you do? What is your role at
Yes. So I'm the publisher of B&H Academic. So I lead the team. It's a small team. There's something like 8 people between editing and marketing and some art design, and just sort of set vision, help decide how many books we're going to publish, what kind of books to publish, sometimes make the hard calls or get involved when we have issues with authors or things like that, which comes up from time to time. But basically just give general leadership to the team, which I really enjoy. I'm really grateful to be at B&H Academic.
And going to that, what is the selection process for books? What do you look for when you're saying, oh, let's publish that, let's go after that?
I thought about this a bit in advance, knowing that we'd be talking today.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it straightforward and simple, and like with an answer that'll work for any kind of publishing. Essentially, we're looking for a good author-content marriage. So what the author wants to write about really fits for that person and is something that's interesting. There are audiences out there for it. And then we also want to see some marketing and sales potential. And sometimes I think when you're in the ministry of publishing at a Christian publisher, it could be offensive to authors or to others if you talk too much about business. So we try not to drop that on them. At the same time, we can't survive unless we're selling books.
Yeah.
So every book, it's almost 50-50, the content author part and then also the sales marketing part. And we look at both pretty much equally in our meetings.
How do you even know, like, this will sell? Or maybe, is it a flip of the coin? I mean, how do you know that?
So it's more subjective than it would probably seem from the outside. So you're asking me to give away trade secrets here.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes. That's the point.
Well, we're actually trying to start a publishing company.
No, I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand why Madison and B&H Academic has. Now I know why you've rejected all of my proposals. One, their content's not interesting, and there's no way that would sell. So
Yeah. I think it's more of like the personality and the topic
and that's 3.
doesn't mix.
Right, yeah, exactly. Bad marriage right off the bat. Yeah.
It's personal.
It's personal.
No,
Fair
it's not
point.
true. But yeah, so there's some subjectivity. So
Okay.
where do we start with this question?
So basically, it's I'm sure. No, do you get submissions from authors? Do they submit things to you, or do you actually recruit authors to write? How is it you work?
Yeah, it can go both ways.
Okay.
So some authors, at an academic publisher, you don't need to have an agent. That's not the case at a trade publisher.
Okay.
So you really can't even approach a trade editor unless you have an agent. But for us, you can come at any time and talk to us, any professor. Usually it's people with PhDs that we're talking to. So anyone out there like that that wants to write can talk to us. And they'll come up to us at conferences and everything without any introduction and just start talking. That's good. That's fine. We want to do that. But also, we do sometimes proactively go after certain authors. The issue is if there's an author that we're interested in, it's usually because they're already somewhat well known on their subject in their subject area, and also because other publishers have published them, and that means other people also want them. So if we're going after someone, then it's more of a competitive situation, and that's just part of the sort of business of publishing.
So when you're sifting through possible works, so obviously you consider the author, and do you also consider how you're going to work with them in addition to the content of the book?
Sure. You mean like, are they easy to work with?
Exactly. Well, I
We
didn't
want
want to put it
names.
that way.
Who's the most difficult author you have to work with?
Maybe that's why
Maybe that's why you're not at
Right,
B&H.
I feel like we have to rectify this. This has come up twice now. So we'll have to talk again
This is a
about
counseling
your...
appointment for me, actually.
I'm
This is an
sorry.
intervention, Cory.
Right. There are some authors, it's pretty rare. There are some authors we've had such a difficult experience with that we would think twice about publishing them again. Most people we work with are really great people. And honestly, in Christian publishing at the academic space, these are all like serious authors who care about their content usually. They're not trying to be famous. They're not YouTube personalities like all of us here. They're just average people. So you're not dealing with like celebrity culture or anything in academic publishing like you would be sometimes in trade publishing. So they're not trying to be difficult, but nonetheless, there are certain authors who it's been so painful or just not worth it. Or sometimes they get a bad reputation. Authors start to venture into weird thoughts or weird controversies, and not every controversy is for us. So there are some authors we might avoid. Kind of feel like we have to avoid for those reasons.
Sure.
Can you define for us the difference between trade publishing and academic publishing? And then kind of on the coattails of that question, are you as an academic publisher primary marketing to seminaries and seminary students, or are you primarily marketing to the church at large?
Yeah, those are really good questions. And I apologize for our audience. I didn't explain what trade publishing was before I jumped right in.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
It's a common term in publishing, so I take it for granted. But essentially, the trade audience is everyone out there. So people in the pew, the broadest possible audience. Any Christian from age 18 to death or something, that's a trade audience. It's not young adult, it's trade. Academic audience has levels as well, though. So the academic audience is mostly for the classroom, but it could also be for scholars. And occasionally there are some professors who want to write for like the thoughtful layperson. And there's a term for that sometimes people use called reflective. So all of that, reflective, classroom, and then like monographs, classroom textbooks and monographs, that could all fall into the academic arena.
What are monographs?
Monographs would be specialized works that are only going to be bought by a few people or libraries. They're meant for other scholars, but they're not broad enough to be used in the classroom and as an assigned textbook usually. So like the book that I wrote, this is clearly a monograph, sadly. It's not a textbook, and the sales reflect that. But thank you, Lexham, for taking a chance on it anyway. So anyway, yeah, we're mostly marketing with academic books. Well, there's a few different audiences, but the main one is the textbook, and then you're marketing to professors. You want them to adopt that textbook and use it in their classroom.
So would it be fair to say that when you're talking about the levels you're writing to, that people have to have people that are going to really enjoy reading certain levels are people that have a working base knowledge of certain topics? Would you say that that's accurate? Like a monograph, for instance, you say it's mostly marketing to scholars, that it's more technical, critical things that you're publishing. So your average person may struggle to grasp some of the concepts because they don't have a working knowledge. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's totally fair. Monographs aren't really intended for a wide audience. So there is some technical language and usually some background knowledge that you're assuming before you step into a book like that. But textbooks can have a range. So it could be a seminary textbook or it could be an undergraduate introduction to the Bible. And then you might assume nothing just about. So it really depends with textbooks what classroom you have in mind.
This is so helpful of a conversation because my experience is most Christians are clueless to the idea of publishing. So the difference between an academic or trade work, and then when an academic, as Madison's bringing up, a monograph, different from a textbook. These are different things. So sometimes you'll have people that will blast a monograph because it's too technical, not understanding it's written by a scholar for scholars or for the academic community. You have to know the audience, what's its intended purpose. Most books, I think generally will have in the beginning, I would assume, Madison, you guys look for this as well too, like the audience is known. The purpose of the book is disclosed, who the audience is and who they're writing to, so there's no confusion. But it seems like most people, maybe because they don't read, enough, they bypass that part. So people just want to go to the best part, something of a chapter that looks interesting or part of a commentary that they want the notes on, bypassing the whole preface and introduction where a lot of these presuppositions or these intended goals are laid out, and they just don't realize it, and then just cast the book aside because it's too technical or it's too lay level. And it's like, well, that's the purpose of this book. It's to know these categories are very helpful.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That actually reminds me. I saw a tweet the other day. I won't say who it was from because I don't want to, shine a light on them. But there's a certain scholar who said that he is turned off by books if in the description it says that they're accessible. So that's a word that we often use in an academic publisher to say, like, although this is academic, you'll probably enjoy it as well, even if you haven't taken the classes that this might be assigned in normally. But for the scholar, he was turned off by it because he wants monographs. So, yeah.
So at B&H Academic, when you say you set out a vision, what does that entail, setting out a vision for your company?
So for us, it was mostly about trying to decide where we would fit into the landscape. So we're not the only Christian academic publisher out there. There are a lot of good ones out there. And we're a young imprint compared to many others. So I was trying to think through what should our aim be? What should our goal be? Not that we're there yet, but where do we want to get? And what would our ideal place be in this Christian landscape of academic publishing? So that's what the vision was. It's an internal vision, so I hesitate to say it publicly. Of course. It's kind of audacious. I'll say that. It's ambitious. But that's a point of a vision, something to aim toward.
And that, of course, would inform then what you select in a way.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. So if things don't fit it, then we want to, as much as we can, not waste time on things that aren't helping to get toward that goal.
Sure.
B&H Academic is doing, and Madison, I don't know if it's since you've been the publisher of it or what, but it's, I hesitate to use the phrase it's on the rise in the academic side of respectability, because there's always been respect to B&H. They're an awesome Christian publisher. But specifically B&H Academic is producing some fantastic works by some up-and-coming scholars who are gaining reputation, some that don't have a reputation, and they're forging it with their first book, which means Madison and B&H, the team at B&H Academic, sometimes will take a risk on an unknown author if they really believe in the content, knowing that sales are a part of that, of course, too. But the work that's coming out of B&H Academic, we mentioned before the podcast, like Gary Habermas's new book on the resurrection and Stephen Wellum's new systematic theology. There's a lot of good works, and it's exciting to see. Madison, just a personal thing, Madison and I, we did our PhDs at the same place around the same time at Midwestern Seminary, and we share a lot of the same friends. So being able to see some of these guys that we're in PhD cohorts together publishing some really fantastic works, that we were part of those discussions, and I was part of some of these discussions as well. It's really encouraging to see. So you're doing fantastic work, man. You really are.
Thank you so much. That's kind of you.
That's just a buttering up, so maybe he'll accept my next proposal.
Shameless plug. He just wants to be published.
There we go. Right. No, in all seriousness, you're doing fantastic work, and that's why we wanted on you. I did have a question, though. What do you so with Christian publishing, there's going to be rivalries, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. Competition. So you have Baker Academic is a mainstay. Crossway's out there. B&H Academic, of course. Zondervan, Kriegel, all these excellent Christian publishers. Where do you see yourselves? Like, what B&H Academic, how are they distinct, other than their Southern Baptist roots, or maybe that's it? But how are they distinct among those other? I mean, is it highly competitive, or do you guys generally work together? Maybe you kind of have phone calls and emails, knowing each other and each other's authors. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very behind the scenes here.
Yeah. That's the interesting stuff. Right?
Yeah, no kidding. I'll just say it is very collegial in publishing, Christian publishing. At the same time, all publishing is competitive. So you're always trying to get good books and grow your size, and you can't help but bump into each other. On the trade teams, you'll overtly be competing for the best authors and projects that come along and setting your numbers, your offers to the agents for them. Academic, it's not quite like that, but still it's competitive. So we're all trying to get the best scholars. Now, as far as how I would sort of arrange the landscape, how I look at it, you asked, like, how do I look at other publishers?
Sure, yeah.
So this is my opinion. I'll just give that disclaimer first. But I look at places like Baker and Zondervan as the top of the Christian academic publishing world because they combine good content with good revenue both. So they're very successful. They're like the model that others look to. And then after that, you have others like IVP that are really excellent and have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Then there's a lot of others that are a little smaller, but also do good work. You have Kriegel, you have us, you have Lexham, Crossway, et cetera. So for us, I think our sweet spot is because we're an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention, we publish within the Baptist Faith and Message. Those are our doctrinal banks, so to speak. So we want to be the best publisher we can within those doctrinal banks, which is generally conservative. And ideally, we'd want to be the leading publisher within this sort of theological lane that we're in. That's what we'd be aiming toward. But we do have there's a ways to go before we'd be like the same size and everything as some of the really established top publishers like Baker and Zondervan. So those are free shout outs to them that they did not even ask for.
Good job.
That shows really collegial. That's pretty nice. Yeah. It's nice to see.
Yeah.
And so, just generally speaking, how is the Christian book publishing world doing? Is publishing books sales on the rise? Are people buying more Christian books?
Yeah.
Yes.
Books are fine, actually, overall. So years ago, in 2011 or something, I got a job as a digital acquisitions editor. The iPad maybe had just come out. The Kindle was sort of new. And this idea was out there that books were passé and it was all going to be digital now. And that projection turned out to be totally false. Ebooks have leveled out at a certain percentage of sales, but not that high. And people, even so, are still buying ebooks. They're not being pirated widely or anything. It's nothing like the music industry. All to say. So books, the print book is still fine. We also sell ebooks. We also sell audiobooks. Audiobooks have been growing. They're probably outpace ebooks now in sales, total numbers for like the whole publishing market.
Interesting.
And publishing grows a little bit slowly and steadily every year, pretty much. It's an established business in every way. There's no like disruption. There's no big disruption coming. I mean, maybe, who knows? I don't want to go out too far on a limb, but publishing's pretty established and it looks like it's going to continue to exist and just slowly grow. Maybe the big trend though is toward consolidation. So some big companies buying up others and just getting more and more concentrated in like all of the publishing efforts into a few big companies. That seems like there's been some moves in that direction and that could continue.
Man, that's super encouraging to hear because you brought up the music industry. Everything's now streaming and singles and home producing. We'll get into self-publishing here in a minute, but it's really encouraging to hear that we as Christians, being people of the book historically, are still producing books that are being read, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. That we still cherish reading and studying and buying print books and really delighting in the printed word.
Yeah, I think Bible sales were up something like 22% last
Yes,
year.
Bible sales went up.
I read an
saw that
article on
statistic.
Fox News that talked about that. Yeah, it's interesting. The article that I read talked about the decline of church attendance, but the rise of Bible sales. And I thought that was really,
It's
really
interesting. Yeah. So and Cory mentioned that self-publishing. What do you think of this current trend of self-publishing and very well-known authors just going out on their own and I'm publishing my own work? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know if any of you read fantasy, but Brandon Sanderson has done his crowdsourcing, like raising money for his own publishing for a few books, even though he is the most successful fantasy author out there.
Wow.
So I think the self-publishing trend was probably inevitable in that there's less of a unified culture these days. And in the past, publishers controlled the gates to marketing to that unified culture. So if you wanted to go on a book tour, if you wanted to be on the radio, if you wanted to be on TV, you needed to work with a publisher to help get you all those opportunities. But nowadays, audiences are much more splintered, and therefore publishers rely on authors themselves to do a lot of the marketing through their own YouTube channels, through their own social media, whatever it might be. So because of that, why do they even need the publisher if they're doing it all on their own anyway? There's that kind of rationale. So for certain people, if you're a successful author, you might be able to do just as well on your own with some marketing. You definitely make more money if you're selling it on your own. And then there also are others who just start out of the blue, like they don't have an agent. They just start writing and publishing and hustling and get their book out there and build huge platforms and sell a lot of books. So I don't think that's going away, and it was probably inevitable that it was coming. At the same time, it doesn't really overturn traditional publishing because at some level, most of the self-published authors don't really want to be publishing companies. There's a lot that goes with it, all the sales and fulfillment and warehousing and printing and all that sort of behind the scenes stuff that they don't really want to do. So I feel like there's still a role. There's just going to be some kind of new marriage or partnership between traditional publishers and self-publishers. And probably you'll see more and more coming back into traditional publishers, but in much different terms that are more focused toward them because of the value they're bringing.
Man, there's so many good things that you just said that, I mean, these can spin off in other conversations. I'm thinking, like, one thing that just popped in my mind, the need for authors now, and it seems like you would agree with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, they need to, if they're published, say, with B&H Academic, because you can speak to that, that you expect them to self-promote to an extent, right? Because here, so I can say this. So as a Christian author, I have a few books out there, nothing big on. I'm writing on some more, and I want to be able to produce more of these things. But there's always this tension as an author, like you feel like you're boasting if you put things on social media, but there is an expectation to have that to generate an audience. Otherwise, sometimes you get buried in a catalog, like an academic catalog at the end of the year, and that's the only way people know that your book is out there. But on my level, and I don't want to deviate too much, I don't want to digress too much, but like, so I'm the director of SES Publishing, which is an extremely small academic publishing arm. I bake it now into our contracts. We expect our authors to do some self-promotion, and most of our authors, I think all of them, are not good at it because it's not comfortable. As a Christian, it feels weird having to put yourself out there. And then you'll get comments from people on social media thinking you're just boasting or bragging, not realizing this is the way to get this, what I've produced, what God has gifted me able to do out there, and the publisher expects me to do it. So what do you think about that with authors? Do you expect your authors to self-promote? Did they ever push back on that? Or you have some that are just, you don't even have to convince them to do it. That's what they're doing anyways.
Well, right. There are some like that. But I think on the whole, my experience is the exact same as yours. So we do expect and want authors to do some level of promotion. Not everyone's going to be equally comfortable, but to do something. But yeah, some of them feel gross about it.
Yeah.
And I totally understand. I wouldn't want to do it myself.
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic, but that's just the reality that there's going to be people who look to them and trust them that we can't reach. And those people might be interested in the book. So the only way to reach them is for the author to do some promotion.
Right. Yeah. And there's almost like a sense like, if this is what, if you put in the research and the skill and is gifted to bless the worldwide body of Christ, both the academy and the church, there's almost a sense like you have a responsibility to make sure people know about it. You know, why there's nothing more pious, there's nothing pious or holy about keeping it to yourself with this idea that I can't let people know, or that's bragging. It's like you need to gift the church with what you've done, and these are tools that, we assign, I do all the time, textbooks as a New Testament professor by B&H Academic. As a New Testament professor, I assign Cradle, Cross, and Crown, Introduction to the New Testament, which is probably the best New Testament introduction, Kostenberger, Qualls, and Kellum, and other books too. There's so many because B&H is just, it's kind of a staple with a lot of stuff that we assign. But that blesses our students to know how to understand God and theology in ways that without those works they wouldn't get. So I would encourage, where that balance is, I don't know, because I'm still trying to walk it myself with being a Christian author. How much is too much self-promotion and how much is not enough? I don't know. I'm just like, get it out and don't be ashamed about it. Christians need to know you're writing.
Yeah. I agree. And if you felt like you had something to say, enough to do all the work of writing it, then it's not bad to get out and let people know about it.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say that, as someone who's not a Christian author and a seminary student, when I'm passionate about something, I want to talk about it. And so I don't see it as self-promotion. I see it as passion. And if somebody's passionately, if what they're writing about is a passion in their heart, that gives me a little bit more interest.
Isn't there
I'm
a sense
curious about why your book, Discovering Dispensationalism, that you edited, it was, I remember reading the first 2 chapters of that book and your chapter in the first one, and I could sense your passion, and it encouraged me to want to read the rest of the book.
Did you do that?
No. but it's sitting on my shelf
Full-
for when I
full
need
confession.
it.
Too encouraging.
Yeah.
Well, you know what you're saying, Ryan? It's almost like there's a sense of stewardship. If you're a Christian author, there is a stewardship there that you need to fan that gift into flame and not keep it to yourself out of some fear that I might come off a certain way. It's like there's a stewardship, a responsibility for you to bless the church with your written works.
And I think for those, celebrityism aside, those that the Lord has given a large platform to, there's nothing wrong with using it
Sure.
To the glory of God.
You've given me good words. I like that. Stewardship and passion. Those are good words for a publisher to use with authors when talking about
There
marketing.
you go.
There you
That's
go.
helpful.
Well, there we
that's
go. We're
great.
just feeding you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Ryan Day changed B&H.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
We're changing our vision statement here. Really quickly, can you talk a little bit about peer review and how important it is, especially in the realm of academic publishing?
Yes, that's a great question. So peer review, for anyone who's not familiar with it, means that you take a work that you're thinking about publishing or committed to publishing, and you have outside scholars go through it carefully and send back their assessment. And they need to be experts in the same topic that's being covered in this work. Could be a journal article, could be a book, whatever. It works a little differently in book publishing, in my experience, than it does with journal articles. Often with journal articles, an article will be sent off to 2 or 3 reviewers, and their feedback makes up the decision. Like the journal just looks at what they wrote and takes the article or not based on that.
And those are blind reviews typically,
They're
right?
blind, yes.
Meaning the author has no idea what peers are actually reading the work.
And the peers don't know who the author is. And oftentimes the peers don't know each other. Like it's a double-blind peer review process.
Which is good because it's just focusing on the content, and it
right.
takes the person out of the equation.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's blind both ways usually for a journal. Books aren't quite as strict in my experience. So we do need an expert to review content. Sometimes we have an in-house expert. There's someone who knows about this that can do it for us. So we just do it on our own, look through it, make sure that this is a good work. Other times this is beyond us, so we'll send it out to someone. And pretty routinely at B&H Academic, we're sending completed manuscripts out. But at this point, we've already committed to it. So you could do a review up front to make sure it's good. You think it's going to be good. But then when the book comes in, it's not always exactly what you envisioned when you contracted it. So there's 2 stages in book publishing. And often we'll do another review by this point, you're already committed. You just want to clean up the work. All to say, it's complicated, but yes, you do need expertise, and peer review is one good way to go about it.
So just jumping in here on this point and kind of combining that question with the previous question.
Well, that was exactly where I was
going.
going.
We're all thinking the same.
Well, I think that when what I'm hearing is that when you're talking about popular level books, self-publishing isn't necessarily a bad thing, but self-publishing in the academic world has the potential maybe to not be a good thing, because when I'm buying academic books and I'm not at a level where I'm able to be critical of their work, it does give me a level of confidence to know that, hey, this academic publisher has had other scholars who are at a level above me, so I can, in a sense, borrow their confidence as I'm buying an academic book. And I think that's really important for people to understand that if you're buying an academic book from an actual academic publisher,
it's been vetted.
It's been vetted.
Right.
And I think from someone who's a seminary student, not necessarily, I do have books that are written by scholars that have been independently published that I think are excellent, and their peers have reviewed it. But I think there is a little extra level of confidence that I'm given as a seminary student buying from an academic publisher. Would you say that that's maybe inaccurate, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And among scholars, a self-published academic work is often not taken seriously. And I'm not saying that's fair in every case, but that tends to be the case. So they want that sort of reputation of not just a good author, but also a good publisher. A lot of professors do when they're considering a book to adopt. And it's not just about elitism, like it could sound that way, but it really is about more like vetting, like you saying, that speaks to the quality of the project, and this is a worthwhile book to share with my students.
It's so important. I think of 2 main reasons why I'm always, now I understand self-publishing. I understand an author who puts a lot of work into their material and wants more of a royalty, a payout for it. That makes perfect sense. But on an academic level, what you're saying, Madison, 100%. For me, I have two main issues that I have with self-publishing in the academic world. Is one, what you just touched on. It's not respected in a sense where it doesn't advance academic thought in the venues where it needs to be advanced. So a self-published work will generally never be published in a footnoted or referenced in a dissertation, in a monograph, in a journal article. The stuff where scholars need that peer review process is so important because it is documented and it is vetted. And there is, like you said, there's a level of confidence has gone into this where it's not, and this is my second issue with self-publishing, it's not just the author who thinks their ideas are worth something.
Right.
And there's a team now, like what you have to say actually is important. They're not putting a value judgment whether it's true or not, but you have something that's important that can help advance knowledge in the academy. And so, having a peer review process or some type of review process says, hey, someone other than myself as the author thinks this is worth something.
I appreciate what you guys are saying. I do think this is something pastors, we're the Pastor Scholar podcast, so I can't let the scholars hijack it, Chris.
Please.
At a pastoral level, Cory and I have had this conversation. There's been times in sermons or in opportunities when I get to speak where I'm quoting content that at my current level of education I'm not able to be critical of. So I am often, to my congregation or the people I'm speaking to,
at the mercy of the author.
I am at the mercy of the author.
Yeah.
So there is a stewardship that I think academic publishers almost have in that I believe the things that I say. I believe the things that I'm quoting. However, there is technical jargon or technical issues that I'm just not. I'm not great with Greek. I'm not great with Hebrew, and so I borrow.
You're not great with English.
Yeah, thank you. It's true. But I'm not able to critique some of those resources I'm reading. I'm able to grasp what they're saying and say, yeah, I think I believe that. But I think a lot of pastors are in that boat, and I think as pastors, it's important for us to be honest about where we're at in our understanding of the content that we're interacting with. And I do borrow confidence, and I don't know how to say it other than that way, from some academic resources.
Mm-hmm. Publishers do fill a gatekeeping role, sort of like what you're saying, and hopefully they take that seriously as a stewardship, as something to carefully care for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Yeah. And just to go along with that, do you feel like in some ways people that, let's say there's someone who has written and published with academic in the past, now they want to go out and do their own self-publishing for whatever reason, in some ways skirting this process? Are they in fact, I know they're collecting obviously the royalties, there's the advantage of that, but what would also be the disadvantage? And I think you touched on it. It's that respect within that world, but I mean, what else might it be?
Most people would wonder why you didn't go back to the publisher you'd already worked with, or any of the publishers you've already worked with. So if you've been published and now you bring out something on your own, the idea was like no one else wanted it is usually
Gotcha.
the implicit message that was probably not intended.
That's why Cory's at our church. Nobody else wanted him.
Yeah. It's true. I found a refuge in a home with a bunch of other misfits. Yeah.
Ouch. Maybe I shouldn't have said it quite that way.
Yeah.
No.
I'm sorry.
But you know what? I would also, I think, Madison, what you're saying is it's important to know because that is the impression that can come across. But then on the other side, I know, and I'm sure you do as well, like academic authors, if they're crossing genres, I know, I want in my mind right now, an academic author who's a respected historian, excellent scholar, published even right now some wonderful work on eschatology and through Hendrickson academic, but also will cross genres into more, not fantasy, but something that's a complete more popular level, and those would be self-published.
You self-published like more those. Trade, would you say?
Well, trade is traditional publishing, so it's still, you have a traditional publisher,
so
but the audience is more popular
broader.
Level. But self-publish, I would assume he's not here, but the reason is that he's completely cross genres, and this is a total different purpose of a book, different audience. It's fun to get out, and it doesn't affect this genre of academic scholarship, perhaps. So maybe that's why some of them do. If an academic does traditional publishing and then also self-publishing, is it because maybe they're crossing genres and nothing more than that?
Sure. Yeah, that would make sense. In that situation that you described, it sounds almost like it's a hobby for the person.
Right.
So he's like a hobbyist in this realm, which makes perfect sense. But if he really wanted to be serious about it, he probably would seek a publisher if he wanted his fantasy novel to get out to as many people as possible.
And the one I'm thinking is not even fantasy; it's more, I even more of a popular level stuff. But the idea, it's still there. If you're crossing, if there's that much of a distinction between literary genres, that might be a reason. But that's interesting to put it that way. More of a hobby, and it's easier to get out. You're not dealing with publishers. You're not dealing with sorry, man. You're not dealing with the publisher
true.
at B&H Academic, refusing your proposal again and again and again.
Oh no.
Putting them on the hot seat. No,
You
but
know, Cory, the Bible says that you should not allow a root of bitterness to spring up.
Yeah.
does it?
Yeah.
Oh,
70 times 7.
Yeah,
something
it
like
says that too.
see, I cut that verse out, or somebody did in my Bible. I mean, it's not there.
That page is missing.
No, in all seriousness, it's that's the sometimes dealing with, because I can speak to being a director of a publishing arm, an academic publishing arm, and we're launching a Monograph series right now, and it is a lot of work. I mean, especially when you have a small team. You said you had 8 at B&H Academic. Is that what it was?
8 like dedicated.
Wow. Yeah. I think we have 3 at SES Press, and we're all pulling double, triple, quadruple duty because we're professors, librarians, other roles, and administrators and stuff like that. And it's a lot of work. And then going back to the author with edits to be made and stuff and indexes to be done, all that stuff, things that the normal reader doesn't even know happens behind the scenes. It's a lot. It's like a mountain of stuff. So I can see some going, hey, I'm just going to get this out myself, put it on Amazon because I don't have to worry about this. I just want it out quick and then move on or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you bring up a good point. What is the length of time? Let's say you get that initial manuscript to finished product. What on average? How long does it take?
So for us, recently, these days, we've been saying something like 18 months from when you submit a manuscript to when the book comes out.
Wow.
Now, it's possible to do it quicker, and some publishers will be more like around 14 months. Trade books, you could be a year or less sometimes, but it's not normally 3 months or 6 months.
Yeah.
It's more like at least
Yeah.
8 or 9 months to up to a year and a half.
And especially if you're going through the peer review process as well, you have to wait on the peers to review it as well, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
got
we're
that.
printing overseas. It's a big book. It takes a while, so it's coming back from China or Korea or somewhere.
Oh, wow.
That adds a couple months to the process. So there's a lot of things that come in there that could slow it down.
Oh, wow. And then, just out of curiosity, is there pressure in academic publishing to put out books that promote new ideas and are challenging established ones? Is that a reality?
That's a great question. So I think in academia, there's always ongoing conversations. Conversations are never static. So although some things that are in all of our statements of faith are not going to change, they're the ground that we work from. There's a lot to discuss on top of those sort of core commitments. So yes, there is a desire to put out new ideas. And that can be like implicit in the question. I thought it's a little bit of risk. Like you could be just being controversial for controversy's sake or something. So sure, there could be a temptation toward that because controversy sells books. So we want to be responsible. You don't want to just chase readers in that way. At the same time, there are a lot of legitimate conversations always going on in academia in every discipline. So you just want to tap into those and responsibly add to the conversation, participate in the conversation as a publisher. That's how I would look at it.
That's such a great way to put it. There's an ongoing conversation that you're adding to. Too many authors, maybe they have this on the, you see the proposals. Do you get authors that think they're something completely new? They're the ones that are changing the world with this and realizing, have a little humility. There's nothing new under the sun. You're adding to an ongoing conversation. That's important, isn't it?
Right. And that's still a wonderful contribution. There's nothing wrong with adding to a conversation.
Taking the ball a little further, that's all.
Yeah, you're probably not going to be the final word. None of us are. Maybe there's a new Augustine in our era, but maybe not. And even so, people still build on Augustine. So
that's right.
Yeah. And then, what is your opinion of ghostwriting and Christian publishers that allow it?
So I knew this question was coming.
Yes.
Getting heat in here.
Yeah.
Chris.
Sorry.
So I'm going to shock you a little bit.
Okay.
Because I work at a publisher, probably.
Yes.
I'm not altogether opposed to ghostwriting, and I don't think any publisher, like any of the big publishers, we're not even the biggest, but any of the big publishers really are. Because there are people out there who are content experts, who create content, who are pastors or whomever, speakers, and they're not good writers, and you want a way to get their information out to the public. That could be legitimate. I would just say it's better if you acknowledge the ghostwriter in some way.
There you go.
So you have a big name on the cover for the author. It's their content; they deserve it, and then also a with smaller whoever actually crafted
this
the
is
book.
perfect.
Yeah.
There you.
Corey, you can take a sermon series that I did. We'll put my name on it.
I would
and you can
never
write
put
it.
my name on a sermon series you did. Just kidding. You know what you just said.
I
So
can't write to save my life. So I'm excited.
this is okay. So, but I would say this. Would you agree with this, Madison? What you just said is excellent. If you credit that ghostwriter in some sense with a with or and what he means by that on the titles of books, you'll see oftentimes like an author and someone else. That's like their co-authors. But if there's the word with, then you can kind of say, hey, this one author is the majority. It's probably wrote the majority of the content, right? Probably the more popular celebrity or the more well-known academic, perhaps. But if you put their name on there, they're no longer a ghostwriter. The ghost is gone. That's the whole point of this. I would look at the sin of evangelical ghostwriting is when it's completely kept as a ghost and it's deceitful. That, for me, and this is just me talking, I think that's a problem. But if you're acknowledging them somehow in a footnote, on a copyright page, or on a cover with, they're no longer a ghost. It's that simple. They're done. They're credited.
True. That's true. Okay, I'm going to complicate it, though, and I want to hear what you all think. So there's another scenario where an author submits a manuscript and they're not able to submit a publishable book. So you read it and it's bad. It's confusing, it's convoluted, it's not well organized, whatever. It's not publishable, but you still want to publish it. So you either have an internal editor really rework it, or you hire a book doctor, someone like that outside who just comes in and sort of edits, really edits and rewrites the book. And at the end, now what? So this happens with some frequency at a publishing house. So now whose name goes on the book? That person's not exactly a ghostwriter, but that book wouldn't exist without them.
Severe editor.
Yeah, severe editor.
You know, you asked what do we think about that, and I, again, not being in the world that you guys interact in from a reader's perspective, I don't have a problem with that as long as as you said earlier, the idea or ideas are. I have read. There's certain preachers that I have listened to a lot, and then heard them say things, and then got a hold of a book. The tone and the idea is different. And I've been able to read and recognize, literally, I mean, nobody's told me, I've just been reading. I said, that's not so-and-so. And so I think that what you just described, I wouldn't have a problem with. And the reason for that is because I'm not a good writer. People will some level of people enjoy my preaching, but I struggle to convey. So every time I give a sermon, I have about 10 to 14 pages of notes when I go into the pulpit, but they are not manuscripted. When I try to transcribe those notes into something written,
Something coherent.
Oh my goodness. It takes me, and I've had the opportunity to write a couple articles, and oh man, it is so difficult for me. I know it's in my head. I know it's in my heart, and if I were just having a conversation with someone, I could clearly articulate
That just
what I want.
reflects the incoherence of your preaching. Actually,
Oh, it could be that. It probably is. But so as I hear this, though, for me, it resonates and makes sense. It's like, yeah, how many maybe published authors do we have that have done that? And yet we're so thankful that those works are out because of the idea that came through that person, but they wouldn't have been able to write their way out of a paper bag. And so in my, which I feel like is me. And so to me, it makes sense, provided I would say the idea was indeed the author's.
Right. Yeah, writing and speaking really are different skill sets.
Yes. Yeah. I think Corey's an excellent writer. I think you're a better writer than you are a preacher, but I think you're a great preacher.
Thank you. Hey, I'll take any compliment I can get these days.
Well, I really enjoy your writing, and when I enjoy your writing, I just think to myself often, I can't do this.
There's something about the spoken word. So there's an old Latin proverb, verba volunt, scriptum manent. Spoken words fly away, but writing remains. When you have something it's public, it's writing, that's going to outlast you. It's now the switch should flip in your mind going, wow, this is going to outlast me when I'm dead. I have to articulate this thought that I can speak orally in a conversation like this in a way that communicates across, that's going to be, through time, and any culture will be able to interpret what I'm saying, even in their own dialect. It is a monumental task of actually writing with clarity. I oftentimes, I'm writing and I'm thinking as I'm writing. It helps crystallize the thought, and it takes time. And it's a skill. Not everybody who can speak well and preach well. And I was kidding earlier. You preach excellent. Even your writing that you have done has actually been very well done.
That's
After I
encouraging. Thank
edited
you.
them
Yeah,
for you.
that's true.
But no, they're really, it's so hard as you just said, because it is. And I'm thinking about this on a personal experience of mine, because Madison, what you're bringing up, so where there's like an arbitrary line perhaps between editing and then you somehow become elevated to writing. Where that line is, I don't know where it's at, but I can say for me, there was a book I did in 2017, an academic work that got published, and I was the editor. Content and copy editing. So I'm looking at ideas and I'm looking at punctuation or everything. And there was one particular chapter that it was just a mess, and I love the guy, and he was a professor with a PhD. And that's nothing. Not all PhDs can write, They might be able to think, but they can't all write. And he wrote the ideas to what you just brought up, Ryan, were fantastic, but it was like in a blender. How do you make sense of this? So I started editing it. And before I know it, I'm like rewriting sentence after sentence to maintain the idea. And so at the end, I'm like, I don't want my name on this. However, I felt at that point, and this is back in 2017, it's not right to, at this point now, this is the author, because I have severely edited to the point where if I'm not somehow credited on this, it is ghostwriting. And so the publisher and the team at the time decided, yes, now you're the co-author. That was the right thing to do because I'd edited it so much. Otherwise, I think I would have been at that point a ghostwriter. So maybe Madison, is there a line? Because I don't know where it's at between severe editing and ghostwriting. When do you become from an editor and now you're a co-author?
Honestly, I don't think there is a clear line.
Yeah.
That's why I brought up the issue to complicate it, because that's why it's a hard question. It's not really obvious where you go from heavy editing to now it's really your content. Now, sometimes it's clear, that's easy, but it's not always. So that's why it's hard.
Does the publishing company want to shy away from it? Because if you have a big name, for example, and it's been, as we say, severely edited or basically current, I mean, obviously you want to publish it under that name because that's the name that sells. But how do you make that distinction, or do you, or I mean,
yeah, there are financial pressures to make projects by big authors go forward and have them be spotlighted, which is why ghostwriting exists at all, in the form that you were talking about, where it's sort of secretly done. That's why it exists, because those books can make money. So, yeah, that's just depending what your standards are at the publishing house. There's always something pushy against you to fudge on them, I guess, when it comes to this. But normally, I will say for us, like most of the books we get are well done, and if we're going to edit them firmly, it doesn't require actual rewriting to that level. So it's like, this doesn't come up every day. It's just sometimes. And we're not on a trade team where you've invested, say, 7-figure advance.
Yeah, right.
This author really matters to you. Your whole quarter or your whole year financially is depending on it.
So do you think that's probably where it happens more on the popular trade level with a celebrity pastor who's got a huge following, it's almost guaranteed sales, that does not have the time to write a book, and there's a ghostwriter who's not credited. And I'd say the problem's also, it's not just the celebrity pastor, whoever the celebrity Christian is, who didn't write their work. It's also the ghostwriter who's willfully, I would say, and again, this is just me, entering into this agreement of deceit, where people now, they know it's going to end in sales because the famous name is on the book that they didn't write at all. That's more in the trade, popular level. Writing, right? So much academic, not the academic so much.
Maybe the scandal in academic would be...
Scandal, I like that word. There we go.
The professor who relies on graduate students.
Ooh, research assistants.
Absolutely. Or who takes advantage sometimes of their ideas.
I've heard quite a lot of that happens, where they will borrow. And do they credit or not credit?
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll get credit, but there's a lot of ways to go about it. Or I've seen it where a student will do a good work, and then the professor will want to come in as a co-author, even though it was their idea, students' ideas. Wow. But they're like, you learned this in my class, and now I want to be part of the credit of getting this idea out there with you. Wow. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, I have a chapter coming out in a book where I actually was a student who wrote a paper for my class in a Romans class, and it was so well done that when I was writing this one part of this chapter, it was relevant to it. I actually struggle with the idea, do I credit an unpublished paper from a graduate student or not? And at the end of the day, I had to fall on yes. And if anything, as any professor, I would think you want to show the training or some influence you've had on your students where they have these ideas in your class. I mean, that's something to be proud of.
That's a shot in the arm to the student, but it's also it's also a badge of honor to the professor.
Absolutely. So I fall on credit that student, even if they haven't graduated yet, with the idea. I mean, is there anything wrong with, at the end of the day, just drop a footnote? Most Christians don't read footnotes anyways. You know, it's like these people that want to go on thinking those ideas are just theirs. If they give any credit to it, it doesn't affect, their prestige anyways. It's like hardly any reader actually reads those things. At least you've done it with integrity and footnoted where the idea or the expression came from, and you're fine.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Or even the idea that a student can go on and succeed. You don't need co-author credit with them. You'll still look good as their professor.
Sure.
That you
Yeah.
mentored this student
Absolutely.
who went on to
Yeah.
be a good author. say.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think of the current level of scholarship being brought to academic works that you encounter?
I think we live in an excellent moment for Christian scholarship.
Mm.
There's a lot of really good schools out there. It's becoming a bit of a hard time for schools in general because of the demographic cliff, and enrollment is down pretty much across the board. So that's a challenge that schools are facing right now. But still, on the whole, there's so many good Christian colleges out there and seminaries. So there's a number of really excellent scholars all over the place, different traditions, different schools, different parts of the country. So yeah, I'm confident, or I don't know, optimistic about all that's ahead and how Christian publishing is going, and just the overall level of talent, ability, the contributions that are being made. Yeah,
Wonderful.
I'm
So
happy.
that means you get to keep your job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm biased. I'm also biased. Yeah, that's true.
Christian publishing has declined. There's nobody good left in it. And everything. Yeah, like after this podcast, you're fired. No, that's encouraging to hear, because again, it's like for some of us, and not just academics, but Christians. Again, I think by nature, because we're people of the book, we want to read, and we need to be. We want to honor God with our reading and grow in our theology, grow in our academics, grow in our understanding of the world. And publishers like B&H do that in ways that wouldn't be done elsewhere. So that's really encouraging to hear. There's nothing that's impacted negatively the Christian publishing world, and there's new scholarship always coming out. That's always going to advance knowledge.
Yeah.
I will say, because I'm on the academic team, we're thinking about books for scholars in classrooms, so those don't go away. If I were on a trade team and I was worried about competing with Netflix or competing with TikTok or whatever, well, TikTok also
Well,
has
that's
book
going
sales.
away, I think, on
Yeah.
Sunday, right?
Yeah.
I think it
We'll
is.
see, yeah.
People are going to know when we recorded this
Right.
now.
If it's still in existence. Yeah.
But anyway, that would be different. I'm not competing for people's attention in general with other kinds of entertainment, because you have to have books in a classroom. So it gives you some job stability.
And textbooks
I
are
guess.
it.
That's true.
Textbooks are it, would you say, for what you guys look for B&H academics? Sorry, I might be going back on something, but textbooks, would you say, is the most valuable of what you publish, or what you're looking for the most?
They're like our bread and butter. They're the core of the program.
What can be assigned in a class as a book?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
makes sense.
Helpful.
So let's go to the writing process as a writer yourself. What is your process? How do you go about starting a book?
I don't approach it creatively. Like some people, I've heard there's two kinds of novelists. There are those who plot everything out carefully in advance and just go through and tell the story. And then there are those who just write and see where the story takes them. So if I were being compared to novelists, I'm more the plot it all out at first. So I want to have my outline in mind. I set aside a certain amount of time each day, and I like to work in small chunks. And I just slowly but steadily get there, step by step.
And was that the case with your book?
Yes, thank you for showing this
Fundamentalists?
again.
Yeah, in the public square.
So this book grew out of a dissertation
Okay.
that we were both going through at Midwestern, trying to get through. And with the dissertation, for me at least, some people would do, I'm going to work all day on Friday and give it 8 hours a day once a week. That would be too much for me. So I would do a little bit every day. And at some point, I wanted to write just a page a day. And that's, you get there eventually writing a page a day. There were times when I'd write more, but that was my baseline.
Do you go
And that
by,
worked.
do you think pages, or do you think word count? Like, I need to get this amount of words today, or pages?
Yeah, I know, like, in my mind what a page is, basically. Yeah, so a printed page is around 300 or 350 words. So that would just be my guideline.
Nice.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about your book in terms of, well, first of all, you did extensive research for it. Can you explain the research process that you, first of all, let's talk about what the book's
Yes.
about, and then the process of researching that you went through.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have some personal questions about
Of course.
what you learned and where you were at with some of that. So,
Absolutely.
if
Absolutely.
you don't mind answering some
I
of
like
that.
Of course.
that.
Well, first, let's
We're
say
all
what
gonna have some
what is the
comments
book
on it, too. Yeah.
We'll start. What's the book about?
Yeah. So really simply, all I wanted to show with the book was that after the Scopes trial, fundamentalists, who were the Christian conservatives theologically of that era, did not withdraw from the public square, because there's a well-known book, Fundamentalism in American Culture, which I can show for anyone who's watching on YouTube, by
Marsden.
George Marsden.
Yeah.
It's a classic. It's an excellent book, so I don't want to disparage it in any way. It's a foundational study. But there's a point, a really kind of almost a throwaway part of the book where he says that fundamentalists withdraw from the public square because they're ashamed, kind of, like at how they're treated in the newspapers and stuff during the Scopes trial. So they win the trial. They get the result they want, but they lose in the court of public opinion, and then they retreat.
So before we go any further, for those who may not know,
Yeah, sorry.
we are
Scopes
approaching the Scopes trial, the 100th anniversary of it in July 21st or 25th. So what was the Scopes trial, and what was the verdict, and what came about?
Right. So the trial centers around a substitute teacher, I believe, who would step into some science classes, and a certain textbook that this teacher was using mentioned evolution. At the time, it wasn't legal to teach about evolution in Tennessee. So it's an engineered controversy. The city senses that it has a chance to create some press and put itself on the map. And there's a group of people in the city who want that to happen, so they work together. So it's not tense in that sense. Like they all know what's going on, but it does become a highly covered trial, and it does become sort of contentious between the two lawyers who are involved, William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow, and it becomes a big deal, which was their intent the whole time. But essentially, it's just about, is this teacher going to get in trouble for teaching evolution from a textbook that they were using? And he gets fined, I think, $100 or something, and he's guilty. But he doesn't lose his job, and the evolution debate goes on about whether or not evolution will be taught in the public schools. It doesn't solve anything. It's not the final word in any way.
And what year was that, the Scopes trials?
1925, so 100-year
Sorry, did I miss
anniversary
that?
of July.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the court of public opinion, the narrative was that fundamentalism is anti-intellectual and in retreat. And although officially the verdict was that Scopes was his last name. That was a substitute teacher,
Yes.
right? I believe that's who it was, right? That's why it's called the Scopes monkey trial. Sometimes it's referred to as that because of the idea of evolution, and that was a figure of speech that was thrown in there. But although he was found guilty legally in the court of public opinion, it almost became like a mockery. Like that's the new thing we should all be accepting, and those who hold to a creation, or even we would say today, young Earth creation, were the idiots. That was like the public opinion. Would you say that's accurate?
So that came to be the narrative about the trial.
Right.
But in the immediate aftermath, I didn't sense that was the case from the newspaper articles I looked at. So I just wanted to prove that they didn't retreat. And as I looked at newspaper coverage, which is what I did in the book, 4 different states, the largest 4 states in the country at the time, none of them are Southern. So they're not adjacent to Tennessee or anything. Yeah, it didn't really look like they were pariahs in the public eye. There were some people who would excoriate them, like H.L. Mencken, if you've heard of him. So that's how he writes anyway, and he didn't like them. So that's fine. But his articles are entertaining, and he's just having fun, tearing them down, basically. But yeah, on the whole, they were treated with some respect in newspapers. There were criticism, but there were also supportive pieces. And it wasn't totally even, but it wasn't all that unbalanced. And they didn't come out of it thinking they had lost in the court of public opinion in any way that I could see in newspaper reports.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say, just real quick, would you say the majority then of the newspaper articles that covered the trial, would you say were neutral?
The majority were just factual, mostly factual.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So your conclusion in the book is that the fundamentalists didn't withdraw
Right.
after the Scopes trial. Why is that significant, number one? And number two, we consider ourselves biblical fundamentalists. We have a friend, Joel Tetreault, who has classified type A fundamentalists, type B, and type C. He would classify type A fundamentalists as cultural fundamentalists, which is mostly how people today, when they think of the word fundamentalist, when we use the word fundamentalist, we're using it in the sense of a conservative biblical usage of the word. So I know I asked 2 questions and I kind of answered it, but I'm going to ask a third. Do you consider yourself a biblical fundamentalist?
So that's not a term that I've heard used in quite that way before. So normally I just say I'm evangelical, and I'm evangelicals is broad, and I'm pretty centrist for an evangelical, so hold all the core doctrines. I think we probably have a lot of overlap, but
Of course,
I haven't
for
heard
sure.
that term.
So
before,
that's interesting because I'm writing. This is actually I want to talk about your book and what I feel about what I think about, which is one other reason why I wanted you to be on this podcast, not only to talk about Christian publishing, but your work in particular. I'm finishing a book right now for Christian Focus, and I'm on the final chapter where I make a case for biblical fundamentalism. And it's conservative evangelicalism. We're holding to the fundamentals of the faith, not a cultural or certainly not an anti-intellectual fundamentalism. Your book, and this is an excellent example. So Fundamentalist in the Public Square that Madison wrote, coming out of his dissertation in Midwestern, I had seen Madison several years ago. We were at ETS, Evangelical Theological Society meeting several years ago. I think it was at Christian Baptist University, perhaps, or Gateway Seminary is in Riverside. It was several years ago. And you had done a paper that was eventually going to be part of what was published in this dissertation. Really good. I don't remember I remember the word bedfellows was in it, like fundamentalists and dispensationalists, strange bedfellows, or something like that, right? Does that sound familiar?
That does.
Yeah, it was really, really good. I get the book, and what Madison does, and this goes back on something we mentioned earlier, that there's an ongoing conversation. Never, or I should say, probably 99.9% of the time, are you going to do something that you're inventing yourself that's going to change the world. You're entering into a conversation. And his is an excellent example of there is a conversation going on, the narrative, specifically, I think, from like Carl Henry's Uneasy Conscience, that fundamentalists are anti-intellectual. It's embarrassing. We need to engage the culture. That's the popular narrative. You enter into that conversation with this book and showing, wait a second, they didn't retreat from culture. The ills of the day, whether it's public school policy or prohibition or whatever, they weren't retreating from culture. They were engaging it with how they understood Scripture. And they weren't so anti-intellectual as this narrative. So you're coming in an ongoing conversation that guys like George Marsden, Mark Knoll, and others, Thomas Kidd is written on. I mean, there's so many, Sandine. There's all these wonderful historians, and you're just adding your part where you're flipping it just a little bit by primary evidence. Hey, it's not this popular narrative that fundamentalists have been cultural retreatists, which some maybe have, but overall, it's actually the opposite. They were engaging the culture with their understanding of Scripture and the societal evils of the day.
Right. And one of the questions then is, why does Carl Henry say that fundamentalists have an uneasy conscience and they've withdrawn from cultural engagement? So it's hard to know exactly how to answer that, but I think part of it is that he's using rhetoric and he's trying to make his point. And I think part of it is that he doesn't like the range of issues they're engaging on. And at this point, their focus has gotten narrower by the time he writes from 1925, and he's trying to broaden them out again. But I had to contend with that a little bit. Like, what do I make of a respected figure like Carl Henry, who's much closer to them time-wise than I am?
Of course, yeah.
Why would he conclude this about...
And Carl Henry is a wonderful, respected evangelical theologian, like a mouthpiece for everything good about academic evangelicalism. Yeah.
Yeah, and I respect him a lot.
Yeah.
But there's another historian named Matthew Avery Sutton who writes something like Carl Henry did bad history. I didn't want to go that far, but it's just to say, I think he had something in mind when he was writing about this, and it wasn't to give a fully factual, careful historical accounting.
So just to clarify, the popular notion, at least what this was in the past, was that the Scopes trial, there was so much negative press that it chased away fundamentalists. They didn't want to engage in going out and, like you say, cultural engagement, however that looked. And then because they were so, just embarrassed, beat up and shame, and this was really widely believed until, as you said, you went through and looked at the press coverage going, no, they weren't. The press coverage was largely neutral. Granted, there were some exceptions, and there were some even positive articles that came out during that whole Scopes monkey trial, monkey trial. He's got me saying it. The Scopes trial. And so really, they didn't, in fact, they didn't really retreat at all, did they?
No, I don't think they did. It looks like from the newspaper reports that they came out more energized, if anything. So they had won a trial, and now they see this issue's everywhere. It's not going away. So we need to fight it in other states across the country.
And how are they doing that? Were they?
There are a couple organizations start up even, or some existing ones start to put more focus in that direction. And even some articles, they were talking about going international. We need to fight this issue around the world. Other countries that
and
are
this
also...
is like adopting laws that ban teaching
that keep evolution out of public school curriculum, which was their concern at the time.
It was exciting to see this published, knowing where it started as your dissertation and seeing it in piecemeal and conference presentations. It's a wonderful book. I highly commend it. I referred to it a few times in the book I'm writing right now. I'll give you some props with it.
Thank you.
I will say, even though it's you consider this, recondite for a few people, as a layperson, I read it and enjoyed it. So
It's accessible. There's
thank
the
you.
word,
Yeah.
it was
accessible, right?
accessible.
Yeah, that's not a bad word.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
It's not.
Do you, would you say that based on your research and what happened after the Scopes trial, would you say that those who hold to a literal account of creation, it was the fundamentalists after 1925 that were really fighting for that, or were evangelicals as a whole? Because today evangelicalism's all over the board as it relates to creation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at the time, when I'm speaking of fundamentalists in 1925, that's almost synonymous. It's another word for evangelical or conservative evangelical. And there isn't the divide yet between evangelicals and fundamentalists, although still some wouldn't use the term, some would, but it's not quite as separated as it became later by the, say, 70s or something. So it's a lot of the same people. But yeah, they are the main defenders, at least in public, for the creationist view. And they're the ones that newspapers look to defend it. There is some range of opinion among conservative Christians still, like there is today. And there are some who are more open to evolution or less. But the whole concept of like a godless evolution, dog eat dog, that's how the world came about. Most Christians wanted to push back against that. At the very least, if they were open to evolution, they'd want to say there's something more redeeming to the process. God is involved in some way. So there are some figures like that, but still, by and large.
So it was less a fight for literal six-day creation and the other Christian views and Darwinian evolution. That was
it's more like how Darwinian is this world that we live in.
Yeah,
That was the core issue.
I appreciate what you said. One of the things that Cory and I have had pretty extensive conversations about is the term evangelicalism and how broad it is today. And so when we oftentimes will call ourselves biblical fundamentalists, I don't think people understand that in the 1920s, and as you said, really up until the 1970s, biblical fundamentalists, what we would say, would really be, back then, conservative evagelicalism.
Interchangeable with evangelicalism.
But today, under the banner of evangelicalism, there's just all kinds of ideas and doctrines, which almost makes it difficult for outsiders to understand who you are when you say you're an evangelical.
Right. Some people don't like to use the term anymore. Maybe that's why you prefer not to use it. I'm
Well,
not sure,
it's
but-
true.
It's become synonymous with so many other things, even political.
It's very elastic and elated. It's become this. It's been stretched to cover all these things. So I'm currently the president of the ETS region, our region here, far west, which covers from Colorado to Hawaii, and we have an excellent region. And it's conservative biblical theology is wonderful. However, on the national level, sometimes, and I know this happens, there are some that sign the document that you believe the Bible's inerrant, you believe in the Trinity, those are the two things, become members of ETS, but don't have a clear conscience in doing so. And they're maybe perhaps doing it to keep their jobs at an evangelical school, university, or Christian university, whatever it may be. Some would call that a
You're saying
theoretical
you suspect
inerrantist.
that because of some
I
of the
do.
things they're writing.
Yeah. And because evangelicalism has become this blanketed term, and now we have a progressive evangelical culture where it's based on political voting, it's based on race, it's based on all these other ideas that aren't what the original, when we say historic 20th century evangelicalism. I mean, this isn't just our opinion. This is John Hanna, George Marsden, and others. And as you said, Madison, evangelicalism, fundamentalism was used synonymously, interchangeably, all the way up until the 70s. And even with Fuller Seminary in 1946, they were a fundamentalist constituency. Evangelicalism, fundamentalism meant the same thing. Then what would turn out the change of name would be neo-evangelicalism, to try to say, hey, we're not anti-intellectual version of fundamentalism, which is what we would say is that's just conservative evangelicalism. We are biblical fundamentalists because we're not anti-intellectual either. So it's weird. That term, unfortunately, I think has become way too elastic and eroded. The term evangelicalism.
But the term fundamentalist, even when it raises eyebrows.
Well, just like dispensationalists do, right?
Because people think that means, head coverings and skirt wearing.
Yes,
and,
yes,
you
it has
don't
that
dance and you
connotation.
don't drink and,
Yes,
and you hate those who do and all that good. You don't smoke. And when we say it, that's not what we're arguing
Yeah.
for.
Sometimes fundamentalist is used in popular discourse almost like too conservative, like you're an Islamic fundamentalist,
Yes.
you're whatever
Mhm.
fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
It's not
yeah.
anything in particularly
Yeah.
that's
That's why you have
Christian.
to add
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
qualifier,
The
biblical
biblical
fundamentalist,
fundamentalist.
right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
just conservative Orthodox evangelicalism. Yeah.
The challenge, I think, it's a challenge because we live in a day where terms are so elastic. Defining our terms is so important, but people just assume definitions and then apply those to other people and other things without trying to understand what's being said. So
It's a really good thing that idea.
appreciate the book. Very
Yeah,
much.
it comes out of the book is
Yeah.
that fundamentalists of that era were not as anti-cultural and anti-intellectual as some had made that narrative popular within some history books. And yours adds the conversation by just adding a little, like a spin, not a spin, but here's some primary research, and the narrative is a little skewed one way. Now it's time to get back to
and
what
here's a good
actually
example
was.
of why this is a monograph. The title would not
Oh,
appeal
right.
to a very broad audience.
Right. It's very
Very-
specific.
Because
Very
people that are
specific,
going to
yeah.
read that book are gonna be familiar with that.
I
era
think it's a
of history.
romantic title. I do.
It's a-
You would
Absolutely.
You would.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gift, I say, husbands, gift this
is.
to your wives
Oh,
and to
Wow.
Hey,
Your wives to
Valentine's
be.
Day is
All
next
right,
year.
all right.
Let's,
He just
or
wants to be
next month.
published with you.
Yeah.
your.
Shameless. Shameless. All right.
Funny enough, interesting enough, this was published by Lexham, not B&H Academic.
True.
Yeah, what was the reason behind that?
I think for me, partly, I wanted to be able to go elsewhere because I have a lot of say over what B&H Academic publishes, and it doesn't have the same vetting, I guess.
Mhm.
So I was hoping to go somewhere else.
That's
That's
great.
great.
You were
Yeah.
willing to be accountable. Good for you.
That's great. Absolutely.
Yes.
Credit to
And
you.
Lexham's a fantastic publisher, so it's. I was very happy to see that come out in that monograph series.
Yeah, I'm grateful they did it.
So for those who are interested in writing, what would you advise? And we'll keep it broad.
Wow. So any level of writing?
Sure. Well, we can. Let's start with broadly, and then we can go academic.
I think I would just say, let's say you want to be a book author. I would start elsewhere. So start by writing articles for print or online publications or anywhere you can. Start by writing something. Make sure you read a lot, that you're up to date on whatever it is you want to get into. And then you just have to maybe put your thick skin on and be willing to get out there and start talking to agents or to publishers and creating a proposal and doing all this work that may not pay off immediately, and just sort of till the ground until you get your opportunity. But mostly, practice, build up some kind of recognition as a writer at some level, and then you start trying to break in as a book writer.
That's good.
Just on top of that, should they? Is it all right to seek self-publishing if you're just getting started? What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really mixed bag. So for the people who are successful and know they're going to be successful, or they have a platform already, then why not do self-publishing? But if you're a beginning normal person without a platform really, then if you self-publish, it's not going to sell very well, and publishers are going to look at that. And then you have a history now. You have a publishing history that they can check. There's services like Circana that have public
That's
data on
interesting,
sales. So they could look back and say, this person self-published 4 books. They've all sold, as far as we could see publicly, they've sold like 300 copies each. And now you've actually devalued yourself to the traditional publisher. So self-publishing is tricky, and I wouldn't do it if you at some point want to end up going the traditional route, unless you are a big deal where your book's going to sell no matter what. Then do what you want.
Does it happen? Does the opposite ever happen, where a self-published author sells a lot and it's publicly on there, and that actually looks good by the time they come to you
Yeah,
with a
that
proposal?
can happen.
Okay.
It's just really rare.
It's
But
very
yeah, you're betting on yourself for sure.
Yeah, and you probably have to have someone well known that's very well known that would share their platform with you if you're a self-publisher for the first time, I'm guessing. So maybe those are some of those people that make it. So maybe to the average person, hey, if you don't have a friend who's got a platform who's willing to share that, might not be the best way to strike out. So
And-
Yeah. That
And,
makes sense.
and for those who maybe want to publish with B&H Academic, what would you advise?
Yes. So for us, it's
get a
people who are-
PhD first.
Yeah.
yeah.
people in academia for sure.
Yeah.
That's actually not are all the B&H academic, is that a requirement? Is that like an unstated requirement? They have a PhD, or do you accept any graduate degree or no degree?
It's virtually a requirement to have a PhD.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if they don't, then we have a trade team. So we think maybe this is better for the trade team if they don't have a PhD. We might make exceptions if someone has expertise. What if it were in the area of law? JD is well, it's its own kind of doctor. It's not a PhD.
Yep.
That would be different. And maybe we'd make an exception, like for an apologetics book. There are some really good apologists out there without PhDs. We might publish someone like that for like a reflective book meant for a thoughtful trade audience. So yeah, there are some exceptions, but otherwise, basically, a PhD is a requirement. Yeah, and mostly we want someone who has all authors to have some kind of connection to an institute of higher learning. So you're a professor, or at least you're an adjunct professor, or you're part of a think tank or something, because that's part of the credibility of the books you put out as an academic publisher. So again, all this sounds kind of elitist, but that's not the intent at all. The intent is just to put out quality works that can withstand public scrutiny, basically, and have authors who are credible when you're publishing them.
I don't think it sounds elitist. The reason I go to school is because I want to learn, and I don't want to learn from people that I know more than. and I understand what I'm saying. I learn all the time from the people in my church about the Lord and God's word. Although I have maybe more study than they do, but when I go to seminary, I want to know I want to learn from guys that have invested substantial time and energy and resource in writing and researching. So just for what it's worth, I hope people don't think that that's elitist.
You know what?
I feel like it's just you're guarding the gate so that someone like me, when I go to a place like that, I know what I'm getting, and I appreciate that. So I don't consider it as elitist.
That's so great you brought that up, because this opens up a whole other can of worms, but another side discussion. But there is this narrative in mainline lay-level evangelical Christianity where you don't need an education, you don't need to go to seminary, and all you need to do is read books. And then you ask them, what are the books you're reading? Every one of them has a PhD who went to seminary, and you're actually borrowing off their training to read those books. And how do you even know those books? Oftentimes, most Christians don't. That's one of the benefits of going to a Christian university or seminary. You're getting assigned textbooks you would never know even existed that influence your knowledge.
And you're being forced to interact with them on a greater degree than just a cursory reading.
So, but this blanketed statement, just read books and be self-taught. The books that you're reading, you're borrowing off capital of someone who was formally trained. Who earned the degrees to be able to write those books.
So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in formal education.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't like it because I'm not good at it, but I'm thankful.
I need to be because I'm not good at it.
It's hard. It's hard. That's true.
And what new titles can we look forward to at B&H Academic, or what current titles? What's going on over at B&H?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll mention a few things that are forthcoming. I think within 12 months or so. So we have a book called Complementarity by Greg Allison coming out, and it's going to look at men and women in the church and God's intent for how men and women interact with each other at a somewhat deeper level than the egalitarian, complementarian argument, or even the internal discussions within egalitarianism or complementarianism usually go. It's going to be a step below that, more foundational. That's the aim. So hopefully it's the kind of book that a lot of people will find, will be able to make common cause on, and also maybe set up some better terms for the overall discussions that go on. Yeah. So that's the aim. So that's a really good one. We're excited about that. And then we have two series, if you don't mind me mentioning them.
Please.
Okay. So one, Pillars of Christian Dogmatics, edited by Matthew Barrett and Craig Carter. And it'll be our sort of serious theology series, and it's coming out soon. A few publishers have these kinds of series going on right now, so this will be ours. And then also, most recently, there's something called the Gray series that you're probably familiar with, New Studies in Biblical Theology. For many years.
That's right. You guys took it over, right?
Yeah. Wow, so for many years, it was published. It starts with IVP in the UK, which is different from IVP in the US. But IVP in the US was the publisher here. And over time, they've stepped aside from doing it. So we're going to be the new publisher with IVP in the UK. So we're excited about those first volumes coming out. And that's... anyway,
that is a highly respected series. The New Studies in Biblical New Studies in Biblical Theology. Is that right? NSBT, right?
Yes. Yep.
He called it the Gray series because the covers are all great. That's a great example of a monograph series right there. Oftentimes, a series of a monograph, they'll look the same, and there's a series of volumes. That one is the most respected. That was really exciting to read. I think I got an email from B&H, wherever it was, some advertisement, like, wow, they're taking this over, because there's like 60 volumes or so, however many there are, but it got buried or halted or whatever, and I thought it was done. So to see that you guys picked it up, that's huge. Congratulations.
Yeah, we're really grateful that IVP in the UK trusted us with this series. It's a big deal for us too.
Yep.
And we're just thrilled. So the first volume should start coming out sometime this year from us. First volume's from us.
Wow.
Well, that's exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Trammel, and we wish you much success with B&H and your upcoming titles.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Thanks for
finally got to
being
have
on.
this
Appreciate it.
conversation.
Yeah.
It's
This is
great.
great.
Thank you guys, and thank you for tuning in.